Jo from Back on the Map, who's very kindly agreed today to speak to us about her experiences. So thank you very much, Jo, for coming on today, and over to you.
Thanks, Zoe. No problem at all. Absolute pleasure if it can help someone in some way. Yeah, we're very happy to do that. So yeah, we'll just dive right in. Have the next slide. Thank you. So I thought it'd be worth giving you a bit of a background about Back on the Map for those people who might not know who we are or what we do. So we were a New Deal for Communities vehicle from 2001 to 2011. We then set up as a registered charity in 2011. And we've been operating in Hendon for the benefit of the community ever since, with a very clear mission around our strategic objectives, which are a stronger community, a better place, and an influencing role for local people. So lost a lot of that New Deal for communities baggage, and really focused on what the community had told us was still required and where the community needed to be improved. So everything we do fits under one of those strategic objectives. We have a trading subsidiary, which is Back on the Map Enterprises, which sits under the charity. It's wholly owned by the charity, and the charity employs all the staff and owns all of the assets. But the enterprises, the trading subsidiary, basically makes sure that those assets that the charity owned are used for maximum benefit and creates a profit that is then gift-aided back to the charity for us to do all of our charitable programs. So we've been in operation, it says over 10 years there, but actually it's coming up to 12 this month. We own and manage 123 properties in Hendon. Hendon is in Sunderland, in the northeast, and it's a very urban area. It takes in part of the city centre, and there's a lot of transient people, and it's a very rundown ex-industrial area on the coast. We own now 8 high street premises. That does include the block that I'll talk about, which we secured the COF monies for. We operate 3 community spaces on the local high street. That is our main charitable headquarters, where most of our community services are run from. We have we bought a former probation building, which is now a youth enterprise and employment hub. And we also run a lettings office on the main high street, because housing is sort of our bread and butter, brings in most of our income. So really important that we have the premises on the high street to be able to provide advice and support for that. That's our one-page mission. Everything we do fits into that one-page mission, and that was recently refreshed at the start of this year, in collaboration with all of our stakeholders, trustees, volunteers, staff, and the wider community, to make sure that as we moved into that second, hopefully decade, out of that first decade of operations, that we were still relevant and still addressing local need. And we slightly revised our top and tail mission and values in light of that, and we added the high street into our priorities, because previously we hadn't invested capital into the high street until about a year and a half ago, because we were really housing focused. But a basis of our COF bid was around that identified local need when we did a post-COVID survey with our community about the state of the high street and how derelict and run down it had become through COVID. Next slide. So yeah, some of the problems that I touched upon in our community, just so you sort of understand what we're dealing with in the wider context of Hendon. We have a huge issue with substance misuse, only exacerbated by COVID. It's become very, very visible. There had always been an underlying substance misuse issue here, but very hidden from society. And in COVID, that just became the norm. People will openly drug deal on the main high street. There's increasing numbers of cannabis farms found here. We work really closely with the local police team and the local authority to try and address some of those issues. We've recently opened a community cafe in collaboration with the Substance Misuse Recovery Organisation, which is a cafe and trades, but also provides substance recovery and addictions advice out of hours. Transients, we've got a huge problem being on the border and encompassing part of the city centre. With transients, we've got the largest number of bed sits in any ward of the city. We've got 35% of our housing stock here as private rented sectors, and 34% of children living in poverty as a result. So pretty shocking, really. The stock is old. It's old Victorian Sunderland cottages, if you know that housing type. Back to back, very small, lot of damp issues in those properties just because of the nature of how they were built and our proximity to the coast. The scale of the problem, it's huge. We've got a high population and it's always increasing. And the transients, as I mentioned, really destabilises that community. The repair and maintenance costs of our assets is a main issue for us because of the condition of those. And it's not just an issue for us, it's actually an issue for other landlords and property owners on our high street and beyond because of the nature and that older type of terraced properties that we have here that makes up the community. There's very little new builds, very little social housing here. Making it stack up is difficult for all of those reasons that I've just described, because movement of people costs money, and then managing the expectations of the community. So as I mentioned, we did quite a major post-COVID consultation with 10% of households in the area. Our staff went door to door to talk to local people, and we asked them what were the great things about living in Hendon and what were the not so great things. And that word map that you see there was some of the things that the community told us was a problem. So, some big issues that we don't always as a local charity have control over or the resources to address, and which is why it's really critical that we work in partnership and collaboration with all of our statutory agencies and other voluntary community sector partners to try and address some of those issues, at the same time manage the expectations of residents about what is possible. Next slide, please. So as a charity, Back in the Map really sees itself as a community anchor. We are very, very locally rooted. I've sort of described how where our assets are. That map sort of shows you what we call our strategic investment corridor. So in our 23-28 strategy that's just been agreed by our board, that purple area that you see is our high street. It includes a lot of our community assets. So we have one small local park. We have a school and a little bit of green space at an allotment, which was just slightly off the plan, but otherwise very green, very urban. So what we'd set out to do is be very much on the doorstep of the community, be anchored here, invest all of our capital reserves and surpluses into that street to try and stimulate and disperse the investment from there outwards. We're extremely accountable to the community. So in terms of governance, which Debbie was speaking about, we have a resident majority on our board of trustees at all times. Some of those trustees bring skills and experience, and where we have a gap in our resident trustee skills and experience, we then bring in other outside people to fill those gaps. So accountants, we've got an architect on our board. We have a solicitor who's actually a resident and a marketing person as well. On our trading board, that is very much business people. So we have housing professionals on there. We have 2 accountants. And that is really about making sure that the assets are maximised, as I said. So being accountable and having those residents on our board from the bottom up. So everything we do, we have a resident majority on our team of volunteers, resident majority on our board, and also 60% of our staff are local people as well. And we really try and push Hendon first with any opportunities that we have. We do whole place regeneration. So it's not just about the physical things, it's about the social fabric. The sort of strap line on our presentation slide tells you everything. It's social and economic regeneration. We can't do the place without having the people feel like it's for them. So whole place regeneration, but people-centred. We do community wealth building through buying assets and spending our money in Hendon wherever we can. One example of that was we did a gift card scheme for local people at Christmas with some funding we had. We got our local traders equipped to take card payments because previously there hadn't been, our local butchers, bakers and greengrocers. And then we utilised the funding to allow local people to have gift cards for local shops to then stimulate some of the economy, so that the Hendon pound stays in Hendon. We are person-centred, so it's about the right intervention at the right time for that person. People will generally arrive on our doorstep in complete crisis. So they're going to lose their home, they can't feed their children, they might be having their children taken off them, they're going to sleep rough that night, and any other horrible things you can think of. So it's about addressing that immediate crisis, but actually what we can do for that person to move them out of the crisis and equip them with the skills that they need to then be able to move forward out of poverty and thrive in their lives. We're very much about community leadership. I think that's evidenced by our governance arrangements, and we have various forums and working groups that people can get involved with. So for Block 57, we've very much used our traders and stakeholders group for the high street to steer that development and make sure it's really, really responding to what the high street needs, but they as local residents and local business owners need from us as well. It's obviously about economic development, I mean, everything I've just described, and about being inclusive. So actually everybody in the community can have their say on what is happening here, and we advocate for people in the local area and give them a platform to have their voices heard. Next slide. So the Block 57 project, which was the COP-funded project, really fit into our High Street Revolution programme. It's the key area of work for our capital aspect of our strategy. And we were a community improvement district project. It's just actually completed. So for the pilot projects for the first five last year, we were one of the 5. And Block 57 was actually identified through that programme as being a priority for local people. So that gave the high street, like our community high street, Villette Road, national recognition. It allows us to really get the buy-in from the traders, because that relationship hasn't always been easy. And I think having the SID as a forerunner to really engage with those traders and stakeholders was probably vital to getting the COF money, to secure their buy-in and real support for the programme. We developed a brand with them so that the whole high street has a collective sense of pride and a standard. And that brand that you see on the top right there, Villette Road, the heart of Hendon, came directly from local people when we interviewed them and said, what does Villette Road mean to you? They just said it's the heart of the community. We've done lots of seasonal campaigns with our traders, and any new traders that come on board once the building's refurbished, will actively get them to engage in the wider work that we're doing. We've done week of actions where we've cleaned up grot spots and we've painted shop fronts and we've deep cleaned back lanes, because it is about the whole place. It's not just about the block, like everything needs to be levelled up. We've greened up assets, so we work with the traders to put new planters out on, well, I'll say new, they didn't exist before, there was no greenery in our community. But we've got planters now. The traders have took on board adopting those planters and taking care of them. We're looking with the council at some street trees to really make the place feel nicer when people are walking up and down. And then again, the purchase of the assets, we're using that group of people to directly steer where we're investing our funds. Next one. So I suppose the bit that everyone's interested in is the COF project, but hopefully that background about the organisation and our mission and purpose was useful. So that's the block right there. It's pretty grim. It's been derelict in the first image that you see there where it says Abbey Lettings. That's been derelict for coming up 15 years. Those haven't been in use. And then the other corner, which is quite hard to photograph as a one, so I've got a separate photograph of that. That was our at-risk and lost asset. So that was our only fish and chip shop. and it closed on Good Friday after COVID, so 2021. So sadly, the community were really disappointed about that. The guy couldn't make it stack up. You can see the condition of the building. He was really struggling because of the state that the building was in to operate his business, with leaks. The electrics were really poor, and various other things with trying to operate a business with, a low profit margin in a building that's costing you money every single day to repair because the landlord doesn't care. So yeah, that's why it was at risk. That's what was at risk, and that's what we built our strategic case on. So through those consultations that I previously mentioned about the high street, one of the things we asked local people was, what would they like to see on the high street? What things did they have that they'd lost, and try and really get an idea from the people who live here what would make them proud of the high street again. And the thing that came up all the time was the chippy. People we want the chippy back. It's crazy we don't have a chip shop. And I suppose little places like that are run by local people for local people, we often underestimate how much social fabric that creates. It's a place to meet. You bump into your neighbours. The guy who runs it and the staff, they have lots of local knowledge. They can give people advice. They signpost people to services. So actually, every time we lose one of those traditional businesses, locally owned businesses on the high street, the community and the social fabric is eroded. And that's how we put together our case to COF. So the main issue, the reason we needed the money, was because if that was viable on the market, well, it wouldn't have been empty for 15 years, would it? The chippy wouldn't have closed. So it's not viable for traditional business people to bring back into use, and nor was there the appetite, and just the scale of the work required would just put people off. The other issue that we had was the owner was not inclined at all to work with us to bring the building back into use or sell it. So once the Traders Forum had identified that Block 57 was a cause of the decline of the street, because it's on our main bus route to and from the city centre. So, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of people a day on buses going past that corner, and all you can see on our high street is a big derelict block of shops. No one's ever going to go get off. No one's ever going to shop here. No one's ever going to have a good impression of Hendon as a place to enjoy, as a destination. And that's what our traders at the bottom end of the street really need. So the main benefit of bringing it back into use was that, to restore a sense of pride, to give the community that asset back of the chippy, but also the multiplier is that we've got those other full shop units that we can attract new businesses to. If we provide quality retail space, we can attract new businesses to the street to widen the offer, to make Villette Road more of a destination, and then enhance the local economy by having more footfall for those other businesses that are still here who are struggling to survive. And the local community benefits, because obviously they've got additional places to shop locally and get services and that they need on their doorstep. The project massively fit into the city plans and the health authority plans for the area. So what we looked at was speaking to our colleagues at the council and the GP Alliance and our CCG and saying, does this fit into what you're trying to do? And actually, can you support us in some way with, if we bring this block into use, delivery of further services with the local authority? The question was very much around, what support will you commit to giving to any new traders that move into that block? So we really can offer a full package to those businesses, but also to the people who live here. So it was about writing that into the bid as well. So actually, this wasn't us just saying, we don't want that ugly derelict building on our high street, thank you very much, give us some money. It was very much about, this is part of a much, much bigger plan for the area, but it actually fits in a lot of agendas, and it sits right within the city vision about bringing community high streets back into use, about having local anchors, about being responsive to the community and having services on the doorstep. So that was really important to put that bit of the case together about the wider context. And also that, I suppose, fits into the sustainability as well. So if we are delivering something that's part of a wider plan, then that should hopefully make this project, but the wider work we're doing on the high street, more sustainable. And the stakeholders, I suppose, are our residents, the traders, our statutory partners. The local authority is a huge player in that. We also work with our local bid. We work with Sunderland Bid. They've been massively helpful and supportive, especially in terms of when we're building the strategic case, bringing some of that good knowledge and expertise. So helping being a critical friend on the business plan as well, and the strategy, the wider strategy that backs up the business plan for this project. Obviously, we've talked about health. They're critical to anything anyone does now. So health colleagues getting involved and really supporting that. And our wider voluntary and community sector partners. So it might be that some of them might move into these retail units because they provide an offer that we don't provide. So I mentioned the community cafe project, which is further down the street, which was a old hairdresser shop that closed in COVID that we purchased. And we don't have any intention of delivering services that aren't our specialism. We want to work with partners to do that. So, it's more sustainable that way. We knew that there was a need around substance misuse. So we went and worked with a partner who that was their specialism and brought that building back into use by developing the cafe with our reserves, but also with the knowledge that it stacked up financially, because they could get health funding and they could run that as a community service sustainably. And that's exactly the case that we'll make with the Block 57 project. I'm just going to mention the 50% match on this slide. The match, so when we had applied, the match was 50%. And I know Debbie and Zoe have really pressed the point on that. And it's really important they scrutinise that match. So just as a top tip is really make sure that your match is in place at the right time, that you haven't spent it, and where you've got that in-kind support. Because we were really lucky, our architects are giving us all of their time in kind, but it will be scrutinised. So you really, really do have to evidence it really well. Next slide. And then the management case. So those are that's what it will look like. Those are our beautiful plans from our friends at BDN, who are a local architect business, who are great group of guys who are doing all of this work for us for free. They also helped prior to the bid in putting together some ideas, designs, but not physical designs that you see here, but designs in terms of what it's going to cost, what could be done, how much might each option cost us, what actually can we afford to do, and what stacks up financially. So on the management case, the long-term sustainability of it and around that cash flow and business plan, it's really tight. We're quite lucky that this building has upstairs residential, which wasn't in a terrible condition. Back in the maps, bread and butter is housing. So we know what that model is, and we know how much we can make from those units. But on our AOI, the caveat was that they didn't want to know about the housing. So we had to walk a really fine line of showing how it would stack up because we had the housing without talking to them about the housing being part of the business model. That was really tricky to get over. So we needed absolute clarity on that. So the money from the rent from the upstairs flats will help cover some of the financing of buying the building, but COF don't want to know about that. So really being really clear about what your project is, even if there's other components to it. And I know Zoe mentioned phases of a scheme. Just be really clear, because they only care about their bit. They only really cared about the refurbishment of the retail unit, and that had to be our focus, where we obviously still had to make sure that the full picture was in the budgets and the cash flow. So we stacked it up with a combination of our reserves and some social financing. which we knew we can pay back that loan over 7 years from the rental income from upstairs. So that allowed us to purchase the asset. Again, in terms of timescales, be really careful when you spend that money, because that was scrutinised. So we bought the asset whilst the conveyancing for the asset was going through, whilst we were finalising the COF. And they're really clear with that deadline date. So find out what your deadline date is of when you're allowed to spend any of your match, and do not spend a single penny before that date. Really strict. In terms of viability and stacking up the finances, we strongly recommend the same as Debbie. Get the valuation, make sure it's current. The market is crazy right now. We know, things we've looked at 3 months ago now worth significantly more. It's a strange time in the property market. So yeah, make sure your valuation is current. The other thing that the valuer did for us, which was really helpful, because they were a commercial valuer, they worked out what, depending on the options of the retail space downstairs, they worked out what would be the sort of market rents, and did us a little bit of a market rent assessment on the street. Again, to make sure we could stack up that long-term sustainability of the block, so we weren't pouring money into something where the rents in the long term wouldn't wash its face. That was very helpful. So whether that's the valuer who can do that, or a local estate agent or commercial agent, or just someone with good local knowledge, or a bit of desk research yourselves, that was a really useful exercise in building the COF bid. And then we got quotes from contractors, so trusted people we've worked with before, and we asked them just to come in the building. We were quite lucky. By the time we got to the point of working with the landlord to change his mind on selling, we were quite lucky that he sort of thought it was in his favour to let us just have access to get things moving quicker. And also he was based out of area, so he was quite keen on us sort of being in and out and keeping a bit of security on his building, because he'd lost his tenant at the fish shop who had done that role previously. So that allowed us to get access into the building and actually really scrutinise the costs, get builders in, and really look at the detail of what it's going to cost to refurbish it, to make sure that it would stack up. Because the biggest risk for us, in terms of Debbie's point on your risk register, the biggest cost with us was the instability of the market and instability of the construction sector right now. So supply of labour, cost of materials. We know since COVID they've just been escalating, and supply of labour is getting increasingly difficult. So we knew those were our two biggest risks. So we really need to make sure we've nailed that refurbishment budget. We did apply for some revenue alongside the capital, and that was for capacity, really. We employed a project manager to oversee the project, oversee the refurbishment of downstairs for the whole programme, because the budget is tight and we need to make it work. We can't go over budget. We don't have any. We have a little contingency, but these things can escalate really quickly. We know that from experience. So we applied for our quota of revenue and employed somebody to project manage it for us. So we brought some skills into the team and some capacity. And I think that's the main point to leave you with on the management case, is make sure it stacks up in the business plan. Make sure you've got the capacity, because we've got from now until, a month ago, till the 29th of June to get this done, which seems like a long time, but in reality, in the scale of what's required in there, it'll be tight. Next slide. And this is just some final top tips. Talk to your stakeholders early, like all of those people that I mentioned. I would say you can't talk to them enough and get them to buy into what you're doing, because it'll really help you write your business case, and it'll really help you answer the COF questions. A lot of it is about, how do you know this is needed? How do you know it's wanted? How do you know your stakeholders are backing you? So the more of that stuff you can do. We did events in a park. We had a traders breakfast in a cafe and bought them all bacon butties. We've done hard hat tours of the site. We've brought people down, potential social investors down to the the high street and talked to them and done tours. I don't think you can put enough legwork into that, because a lot of the questions in the application are around that. Viability, again, another huge one. I know I don't want to labour the point because I've talked about that in the strategic case and the management case, but actually, does it wash its face? Does it stack up? And not just in terms of like actually bringing it back into use, but in the long term, it's not going to be a liability to the organisation. That feeds into the business model. And I suppose in terms of time and capacity, I mean, the best thing that we did was give ourselves our own deadline. So I know Debbie said about the very strict noon, the window is closed, and it is very strict. So we'd sort of give ourselves, like you do in a budget, a contingency of a week, which was actually really lucky for us, because I was mentioning to Zoe and Debbie before we came on, we actually missed a whole section out. So we'd done the good practice guide, we'd put the questions in a Word document, we'd worked on them jointly, we'd had people look at them and had the critical friend eye from various people like Sunderland Bid, like locality. And we just completely missed a whole section. And it was a meaty section, and we basically had to just down tools, myself and our business manager, and just write that section. So it was lucky that we had allowed ourselves the contingency window, and it's just so easily done. So that's my biggest top tip, learning from experience. And then submitted early. So as soon as we'd thought we were ready, realised we weren't ready, did that question, then we just got it in. We didn't want to risk the window closing early, the portal being down. One of us gets sick and we can't do it. There's so many things that could go wrong if you leave it right to the last window. So really do get it in early if you can. And then Zoe's thing about don't sit on your butt when you get the yes. Don't sit on your butt while you're waiting for the yes. That was from me. So get ready early. So assume you're going to get the money and get ready. So we did all of our work with the architect, got the pre-planning, because we know 6 months to refurbish that building is not long enough. But we know what the COF time scales are, and we're very aware of how little time you get. So work backwards in terms of your timescale planning and your Gantt chart to say, like, how long does all of those things take? Right, well, we need to start now in all the preparatory work. So getting planning done, getting plans done. We started writing our tender, assuming we had the money, because again, all of that takes time. So that as soon as we got the yes, we were able to put the tender out, put in the planning, get all the key people appointed quickly, get the job advert out, get our project manager, and try and save as much time on all of that preparatory work that you're going to have to do anyway. And I know that's sort of like taking a bit of a punt with your resources of your organisation, but if you do get it, you're really up against it in terms of timescales. That's how I felt, and I think I'm really pleased we took the time and resources to do some of that prep work in advance, because I think we would be struggling otherwise. Yeah, and then procurement. The procurement is tight, so anything over 25. We had hoped that we would get one contractor to do everything on budget. Again, that we were really silly, because no. And as soon as people knew we had public money, government money, I think they just tripled their prices. It was like as if we were buying something for a wedding. It was ridiculous. So we've had to piece it out by job to keep it on budget. So the procurement rules, just to be aware, are the £25,000 they need 3 quotes, up to £25,000, 3 quotes. Anything over is full tender. And likely you're going to be over 25 grand what you're buying. So be prepared that you need a tender, and do some of that work in advance. And then my final point to leave you with, and again, this is something where we were like, up against the wire. The match date is so strict. There is no wiggle room. We met the date by like 2 days. And that was uncomfortable. So like, make sure you know that date, and make sure you don't spend a penny before that very strict date of your match funding. And that's it. Questions?
Thanks, Joanne. That was great. We've had a question and a comment. Someone saying this is really inspirational, your project. Can you just confirm again how much funding you got from COF and also from other sources as well?
So we got 168,000 in total. 28 of that was revenue to employ the project manager, and the building cost us 225,000. Half of that was our own charitable reserves, our capital reserves, and half of that was a social loan over 7 years.